G'day, it's Kareem here on Does It Matter? I've had quite a few jobs in my life, um, all manner of things, cleaning, security guard. I'm currently a martial arts instructor and I'm a security guard again. But for many, many years, quite a few people who know me, I was a bouncer, doorman. And I had some very interesting experiences as a doorman. You get to see, you get a real insight into human beings. I mean, ostensibly they are drunk. You've got to give them that. There's a caveat there in the respect that they're drunk. But then again, a lot of people, once the disinhibitory effects of alcohol pour into their veins, you get to see some of the underlying beliefs that they have. It doesn't usually do a service to their personality. Most people have substantially better personalities sober than drunk. It doesn't reveal the truth about everything, which is a common aphorism and it's incorrect. But it does give you an insight into what some of their deeper beliefs are about certain things. And there was always what always perplexed me was you'd find someone doing something that was blatantly wrong. And generally, as a rule, if you're a reasonable guard, you give them a warning, or even two. You'd find them doing something not too egregious, and you give them a warning, maybe even two. But eventually, if people keep infracting and making themselves antisocial knobs, it's time for them to go. And it was always peculiar, the litany of things that you get, like, oh, I've got to tell my friends, I've got to go to the toilet, I've got to make a phone call, can wait just for a second, where's my girlfriend, blah, 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 litany of excuses, one after the other. And I'd usually say, listen, grab your phone, follow me to the front door, you can call them from inside. Once you're outside, I might be able to help you, but I'm not going to help you do anything right now. You need to leave. That worked with most people, but some people, when they're drunk, it reveals the clouds part to reveal the true sky. The alcohol effect takes away the natural restraint they might have on their rampant narcissism or on their overwhelming and overweening sense of entitlement, and they would say, well, no, you can't touch me. You can't touch me. So I'm not going anywhere until I've done what I want to do, or I finish my drink, or I'm not leaving at all in some cases. And I would say to them, well, yeah, I can touch you. I'm not here because I'm stunningly beautiful. I'm not here for the fascinating conversation. I'm not serving hors d'oeuvres. You need to go. And it was truly, if you've never done this job before, if you've never been a bouncer before, it's stunning to see the outright denial in their face. I mean, you walk around with a uniform often, you got your badge on, they've seen you talk to people, warn people, clear doorways, do the things that you have to do, stand around looking at everyone, making sure everything's cool. They know full well why you're there and what you're doing, but they have a sense of exceptionalism, which is a common problem nowadays, as much as I guess any other time, perhaps more. And they felt that they were that exception, and that they had an entitlement to be able to infract the rules and do whatever they want, and no one should touch them. And I always found it interesting because I like to look at faces. I look them in the face. I look them in the eye. I like to read faces because I'm not particularly good at hearing tones and stuff and audio cues. I'm not great with that. I've got ADHD and I'm not always great with picking up every cue. So I got really good at reading faces and reading body language because I have to do a lot of that stuff manually rather than automatically. And I would grab them because eventually you have no choice, and you try to maneuver them, gently guide them out and grab an elbow and push your body behind theirs and give them a bit of a nudge. You try everything you can to not escalate it, but Some people seem determined to go to the bad place and meet Mr. Mayhem, and they do. And invariably, they would end up picked up. I would carry them out. I'm pretty strong, so I would carry them out, especially the big guys. They never expect it. Once their feet are off the ground, they're more or less helpless. And I would tell them, if you bite me or hit me, I will slam you head first into the ground, because I used to wrestle. So 99% of the time, they did not fight. They would swear at me and yell at me, but they would not fight or hit me until I put them on the ground. So it was a very good strategy for avoiding a fight, at least until we were outside and away from all the innocent people. And from there, then they really got to meet Mr. Mayhem, because some of them would take swings, punches, grab, bite, claw, all that stupid shit. And I just put them to the ground again and get on top of them and smother them and crush them, which was fun, I must admit. When someone has forced you, and often on a cold night, you're tired. I've already trained for 2 or 3 hours a day. I don't want to do any more. So if you force me to, I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to get something out of it, because you've put me to a lot of trouble and risk, and I don't want to put my hands on you, smelly drunks. I don't want to do the violent thing. And if you force me to, well, I'm going to get some satisfaction from your discomfort at least. That's an honest appraisal. I know it's not particularly PC, but I don't give a fuck about PC. It's the honest truth, and people need to know it. So I'd sit on top of them. We'd call the police usually, unless I was going to let them up after a while. Sometimes you're merciful because, they're too drunk to be entirely aware of what they're doing. And if you think that they're going to get up and they're going to walk, they're going to be peaceful, let them off. Let them off. They got squashed. They got some bruises. That's enough. But the look on their face, you can't do this. You can't touch me. You can't pick me up. You can't pull me on the ground. I threw punches at you. I tried to scratch you. I tore your clothes, but you can't do anything to me. And it was an astonishing insight that still to this day is somewhat breathtaking at times. The degree of entitlement and exceptionalism that people walk around with. And it wasn't always the young ones. Sometimes it was the middle-aged ones. Just often if they were a boss or a manager, a position holding some authority over others, and they just weren't used to being brooked at all. Certainly weren't used to being physical and then having people be physical back. They weren't used to that at all. If they broke something or made a pig of themselves or pissed in the corner, I literally caught so many people urinating inside at the bar, in pot plants, right in front of other people, just deciding that was okay. People throwing full glasses across dance floors and cutting people open and launching ice as hard as they could at people's heads, and then thinking that was not a reason to suffer repercussions and be removed. But that sense of entitlement, that sense of exceptionalism, is something that we all have to look out for, because I have felt it too. I felt it creep in. And certainly we would all like to be free of consequences. We would like to be able to do what we want and not suffer the consequences. It would be very bad for us, as well as bad for society and everyone else around us. But even just at a personal level, getting what you want without consequence is going to make you into a literal monster. You're going to be a monster. People like Hitler and Adolf Hitler and Stalin and Pol Pot, they weren't just popped out of their mum's vagina as monsters. No, they were just little kids. They were born. They may have been odd, they may have been normal, but they were little kids, and they grew up as children into teenagers. And it took a long time for the monstrousness in them to be nurtured and grown that way. And for me, it was always a salient lesson that a lot of us are walking around deluded, utterly deluded, and feeling exceptional to society, as if the rules don't apply to us and physics doesn't apply, as if consequences don't apply, and feeling a terrible sense of, overwhelming sense of entitlement that is vastly disproportionate to reality. You have a right to swing your fist, but it ends just before my nose. and God help you if it lands. Okay? Keep your hands to yourself, and I'll keep my hands to myself. And that was always my rule, and it still is to this day. I don't understand people who can't function by that rule. It's bizarre. It doesn't matter how badly. Go and punch a wall, break your hand. Scream, yell, walk away. Go for a run around the block. Go and pick up heavy stones in the park and throw them until you're exhausted. Whatever it takes. Don't break people's property, don't break their shit, and don't hurt people. It wasn't that hard for me to understand. It seems to be really hard for some people to understand. I get the feelings, I get the emotions, but it is what it is. The other thing that I encountered when I was bouncing, there's a phrase probably not heard so much anymore, but we used to call women the gentle sex or the fairer sex. And that certainly are the fairer sex as far as I'm concerned. Gentler sex? No way. Men are probably moderately more aggressive on average, and they're certainly more effective in their aggression. But in the course of my job as security and as a bodyguard and a security guard, I have been hit by almost as many women and assaulted by almost as many women as men. And I know that's hard to believe, but it is a salient fact. I've had almost as many women jump on my back when I'm escorting someone out or hauling someone out because they've tried to punch me or hit me or someone else. I've had women break glasses and bottles over my head, hit me with stools, all manner of things, stab me with nail files. I got stabbed with a nail file. Once I got stabbed with something, I don't even know what it was, but it left a nice little hole in my oblique, which wasn't fun for a couple of weeks. I've had women gouge scars in me that took 10 years to go away. Scars in my arms, just with their nails. And in all but a couple of those cases, I didn't have my hands on them at all. I wasn't even removing them. I wasn't physically involved with them at all. So I've seen, and this isn't a woman bashing episode, but this is simply to reiterate that we have some myths in our society. The same as the people in the previous point I was making have some myths internally in their heads. We also, on the broader scale, have some myths in our society. I've seen far more women hit men in public. I mean, it's like 99.9% women hitting men in public than the other way around. And that remaining sort of 0.1% of guys who will actually hit a girl in public, there's plenty of guys who'll do it. Well, there's not plenty, but there's a high percentage of men that'll do it in private. But out of that percent, that's another story entirely, and they're cowardly pieces of shit. But the percentage, that tiny percentage of men that would hit back often had been hit already. They were in a fracas, they were in a fight. The girl was hitting them and they've become physical and pushed her, hit her, whatever, in return. I'm not going to go into the justifications of that. It's contextual. The same as if you were arrested by the police and you're in a fracas with anyone, male, female, Martian, whatever. They're going to judge it by the context of the situation. They're going to judge who was aggressive, who was instigating the situation. Did anyone try and leave the situation? Did anyone try and de-escalate? Who tried to escalate it? Who caused more harm? Who was more verbally aggressive? Who made threats? Who didn't? So on and so on. So there's a lot of context. There's a lot more than that to it as well. And I would simply separate people. I would simply stop these things. But in the course of that time, I saw, I've literally seen it. Well over 1,000 times. Women physically assaulting men, preventing them from leaving the club because the guy was leaving without them. Preventing the guy from walking away from them. Preventing the guy from he didn't want to look at them because they were upset with each other. Forcing him to look at him with turning his face towards them. Now, I've seen the same thing by men, but I've seen it incredibly rarely. It's not common. Again, probably happens more often in public. It certainly does happen more often in private. The thing that always freaked me out was if it happens in public fairly easily, you can guarantee that a lot more is happening in private. And I was always horrified by the fact that I saw these women hitting men, which never makes the news, rarely ever makes, well, it's statistically sound, but you never hear it quoted, certainly not by feminists. And you go, well, you know, I know that if a guy slaps his girlfriend in public, he's flogging her in private. That's almost certain. You know, I'd put money on it. That's safe money. Well, it goes the other way around because it's not gender-based. It's got nothing to do with gender. It's got to do with mental health issues. It's got to do with being narcissists. It's got to do with being psychopaths. It's got to do with all manner of criminality. It's got to do with a whole range of things. Lifestyle, blah, blah, blah. The variables are endless, but they're all the responsibility of the person assaulting the other person. It's all on them. And whatever's driving them, it's got to do with that, not the genitalia. And so I would break these situations up, and almost invariably, and men do this too, they would turn on me because I was, how dare I interfere in their domestic violence. And at that point in time, I encountered two things that were the most common things. White knight syndrome, in that the minute that you're removing a female from security, or you're preventing her from entering an establishment, or you're clearing the licensed area so that she's not making it impossible for people to come and go, or you're preventing her from assaulting someone, which was the most common one of all, people would jump in and go, don't touch a woman, you can't touch a woman. Okay? I have had this said to me scores of times, possibly a couple of hundred times in my life, while I was being hit, while I was being scratched and kicked, while I was having things thrown at me, while I was having people, this person rush at me and throw their body at me. So those white knights come out of the syndrome, because at the end of the day, people, all of us to some degree, some a lot less than others, are prone to virtue signaling, and are prone to trying to get laid, to be honest, and a virtue signal out there because someone might be watching who might, there might be something to gain from. And also it's cultural indoctrination too. Now, I'm a firm believer in equality. I'm an actual egalitarian, and that means that doesn't mean that I'm going to beat everyone similarly. If a huge guy throws a punch at me, yeah, I'm gonna break his bones. If a little chick throws a punch at me, I'm just going to control her, okay? But it's still going to be painful for both people. It's not going to end well for either one of them because they've instigated violence, and I will respond with an appropriate level of violence. That is acceptable to me. Proportionate violence to the threat that is in front of you. Now, I'm not going home with stitches, which I have, because I underestimate or fail to defend myself from a woman. A woman can give me stitches. I've had stitches from women. I've had bad bruising. I've seen women break noses, chip teeth, cause extensive and expensive damage. I'm not prepared to do that. And again, as I said before, I've been stabbed twice by women. So in the course of my job, in the back and the side, not even from the front. So no, they're not less violent. They're not meaningfully, not in any statistically significant amount. They're less capable. They're less dangerous, and that's the truth of the matter. And this makes them slightly less inclined when they're sober. When they're sober, they're much less inclined to violence. But once there's drinks or there's strong emotion, mob situations, no, I haven't noticed much difference at all between men and women. Men will jump in more quickly. There's some differences, but they're marginal. And at the end of the day, you're having to look out when you're security. You're having to look out from everywhere. And like I said, a number of times I've had them on my back, clawing at my face. trying to hit me with bottles and stuff like that. Yeah, it's happened a fair bit. So you develop a more realistic assessment of the nature of human beings, both male and female. So you get the white knight syndrome, and you often end up having to defend yourself from male protectors who are virtue signaling and failing to consider context because they don't care. They're trying to virtue signal, get laid, or they're just culturally indoctrinated and haven't got a critical thought in their head. They can't make an assessment for themselves. And the other one was the waterworks. So you would deal with violence. Now, this happens with guys too. More with women, but it happens plenty of times with guys. So I'm going to mention this more generically in unisex. People will physically assault you or others. They will break property. They will try to set fires. They will spit. They will do the most atrocious things. I'm not going to go into details. I have seen it all. They will use weapons. I have removed a guy from a toilet. He refused to leave the toilet. We spent 20 minutes trying to talk him out of the cubicle after we were shut. When he came out with shit scooped in either hand and proceeded to try to throw it at us and smear it on us. Shit. His, I presume. I have had a woman in my first 3 years of bouncing do the same thing. Refused to come out of the toilet. And then she did the same thing. And about 20 years later, a guy did it at Mojo's nightclub in Hindley Street. Yes, people are disgusting, and they will resort to almost anything when they are sufficiently out of their minds. And in both the cases that I'm mentioning, they were detained vigorously. They were soaked because I turned a fire hose on both of them and ourselves because they had put it everywhere, and they were freezing. Both times it was a cold time of the year. It was autumn and winter, I think, too. And they're crying and sobbing on the street, bemoaning their fate, complaining they were cold and wet and bruised and sore and uncomfortable because they've got 100+ kilo guys kneeling on them. And the waterworks ensue. And that's when you get more of that white knight syndrome from any passing people who are passing by. Whenever you see coppers or security guys holding a dude down, look, have a look, by all means. There are egregious transgressions of justice by guards and by police on occasion. Most of the time, I just witnessed one around the corner from me where they were clearing out public housing that was full of dregs, full of people suffering and who weren't managing themselves well, or their children, and they were all cleared out and taken away, and the kids were taken away, thank goodness, from their worthless parents. I feel sorry for them, but they were utterly worthless to those children. And they were kneeling down on the ground, they were held down, and one of them was fighting, so he's pushed onto the ground and held up in the same way as I've cable tied plenty of people and held them down. And they cry and they elicit sympathy from others. Please be careful about that. You didn't see everything. 99.9% of the time, you didn't see enough to make a judgment. It's upsetting to see people in pain. It's upsetting to see people upset and crying, but you don't know why they're crying. They're not necessarily crying because they're victims. They're crying because they're guilty perpetrators who have harmed others, destroyed property, showed callous indifference towards other people's well-being, and are now suffering an extremely restrained consequence for that, and are in the process of facing the judicial system. They'll be arrested and face the judicial system. And your feelings on the matter are not relevant. The way that makes you feel is because you're a human being and presumably you're a decent person with empathy. But you've got to remember that sometimes our empathy is misplaced, or at least it is not appropriate. It's not the appropriate. It's a natural reaction, but it's not an appropriate reaction for what we're seeing. We don't always have all the data. And in those circumstances, provided that I can see that the guards or the officers involved are being professional, I have no problem. Especially if the person is still resisting and creating a threat for the guards or the police officers concerned. If you didn't see all of it, reserve judgment. If you see an abuse, film it, by all means. But if you don't see abuse and you don't see anything that's inappropriate, that your head, not your heart, tells you is fine, then don't film it. Don't get in the way. Don't make it more unpleasant for both that person. That person's also suffering a humiliating experience. They certainly don't need to be filmed and turned into your clickbait. And that's another thing too. Don't make people your profit. That's their misery should not be your profit. As reprehensible as they may have been, they have a chance for redemption, they have a chance to grow, and you can actually damage that process and take it from them by publicising some of their worst or more egregious mistakes. Everyone deserves a chance to repent, to grow, to change, and in this modern media age, it's way too easy to take that away from people. So there's a couple of situations that I've come up with as a bouncer that come up over and over again. Next video I'll go into a couple more specific stories that have they're somewhat grim but also have some humorous elements to them. But just keep in mind that we can all be a bit entitled, albeit all feel we're a little exceptional, and we can all feel like being a white knight sometimes, and jumping in may be just the worst thing we could possibly ever do. Cheers. See you next time.